So no one has condemned Joe Biden for bombing Syria. Most of the so-called squad have been completely silent. They won't even acknowledge it, which is incredible. You know, again, if there's a list of things where you should, which warrant a reaction and condemnation, I think bombing another country is high up there. And yet nothing from AOC, nothing from Jamal Bowman, whether you consider him part of the squad or not, I don't know, but apparently they do. Cori Bush. There's nothing from Rashida Tlaib. There's nothing from Ayanna Pressley. Ilhan Omar and Ro Khan, I think, are the only ones or from the progressives in the Democratic Party who've actually said something. I'm actually surprised that Ilhan Omar said something. But Tulsi Gabbard has now issued her own statement. Now, if I recall correctly, she's not running. She's not in Congress anymore. She's decided not to run for another term. And I want to play you the video that she posted, because she doesn't just talk about the airstrike. She talks about the United States and more broadly the West. There are brutal policies against Syria. So not just this bombing, right? Because I mean, as big of an atrocity as it is still a continuation of Obama, of Trump. And I mentioned to you that Biden is not just bombing Syria. He's continuing sanctions. He's continuing to steal the oil. And so I want to play you what she said, because I think her statement was very good.
I am glad to hear that some of my former colleagues in Congress are speaking out against the recent unconstitutional airstrikes in Syria. But they're ignoring the bigger issue. The regime change war the United States continues to wage in Syria, using Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, HTS terrorists as our proxy ground force, and who now occupy and control the city of Idlib, imposing Sharia law and cleansing the area of most Christians and religious minorities. The Biden administration continues to use our military to illegally occupy northeastern Syria to, quote, take the oil, as Trump so crassly but honestly put it, violating international law. A modern-day siege of draconian embargo and sanctions, similar to what the Saudi-U.S. alliance employed in Yemen, is causing death and suffering for millions of innocent Syrians, depriving them of things like food, medicine, clean water, energy, warmth, and making it impossible for the Syrian people to try to begin to rebuild their war-torn country.
All right, so I mean that was straight to the point, right? Now, I mean, I criticized Tulsi Gabbard pretty harshly when she endorsed Biden, because that pissed me off. I did the same thing with Bernie Sanders. I know they have like a contractual obligation because they ran inside the DNC, which I think is the biggest scam of all time. It's like, oh yeah, if we screw you over, which we're legally allowed to do because that's what a court decided, since we're a private corporation, you still have to endorse our pick. How democratic. Anyway, so I mean, I criticize her heavily for that, but here, man, I mean, look, she's spitting facts. I mean, she's caught a lot of flack before. She went to Syria once, and do you remember that time when Barry Weiss, who used to work for the New York Times, she went on Joe Rogan, and then she just like randomly starts calling Tulsi an Assad toady, and then she doesn't even know what toady means. She's like, yeah, it's just, I don't know, can you Google that for me? Like, what does that even mean? I know what it means. It means that, if you go into Syria to see what happens, what's going on, the right way, the legal way, that's not allowed. But if you go in there illegally, like John McCain, and you meet with a bunch of terrorists and give them money from U.S. taxpayers, then you're not an Assad toady. Okay, then you're one of us. You get it? That's the difference. So, Tulsi Gabbard, she's caught a lot of shit for that before, right? And because she dares to speak out about the truth. This is the whole truth, nothing but the truth, what you just said. So, I mean, a couple of points, right? She said, yeah, it's good that some people are calling out the airstrikes, but it's not everything. It's not. And the sanctions, for example, are extremely brutal. So, I mean, you've had various sanctions ever since Obama. Obama was also putting sanctions on Syria, right? That's if it kills people and hurts people, they'll do it, right? But the Caesar Act sanctions, which Trump used in 2020, June 2020, I mean, those were taking it to the next level, right? And I mean, this is just one piece. I mean, this is just one random piece. Again, Foreign Policy magazine, not exactly, are the best here, but they do speak some truth in this piece, and this is from December 2nd. And they compared it to how Iraqis were starved under Saddam. Do you remember Madeleine Albright being asked if she thought it was worth it that 500,000 children died in Iraq because of U.S. sanctions? That was acceptable? That was worth it? And she's like, yeah. And then Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks goes and interviews her and acts like she just met her idol. It's unbelievable. So they go into this a lot, and I've gone into sanctions with you guys many times, specifically about Syria, and you had this is also from December 2020. Syria's bread lines are so long that children have to skip school to wait in them. This is from Washington Post, right? So I mean, this is horrendous, right? It's really bad. On so many fronts, and I don't think people understand. Syria, since the 1990s, started going on a path of becoming self-sufficient. So, Mesopotamia, the Levant, this region. I mean, it's not just where agriculture was literally invented thousands of years ago. But it's very fertile soil. Syria does not have a problem growing food, right? Yes, there was drought for a couple of years. That's definitely an issue sometimes. Definitely an issue. And nonetheless, my point is that from the 1990s, you still had Syria becoming more and more self-sufficient, specifically in wheat, for example, right? So Syria had so much wheat that it was able to export wheat. It had an excess of it, right? It was exporting wheat to Italy, right? So it didn't have a problem. It didn't have bread lines until these sanctions came along. So do you see how sad that is? That this war has taken a country that had an excess of wheat and reduced it to bread lines because of U.S. sanctions, because of Western imperialism and bombs. What the fuck is that? I mean, you want to come here and tell me that's an improvement? Whose lives are you improving with that? How has 10 years of war improved anyone's lives? Can you explain that to me? No, of course they can't explain it, because they're not going to own up to it. And so that's just one aspect of it. Never mind the lira, the Syrian pound, which is called the lira. So I mean, I can tell you myself, if you went in 2010 or something, right before the war, like €1, $1, that would give you about 65 lira, right? 65 lira. I mean, you can buy. I'm going to give you in terms of junk food. You could buy a can of Coke or Bebzi for, I don't know, 15 to 25 lira, depending on which corner shop you went to, or, a bag of chips for like 10 lira. I mean, and now, that 65 lira is gone up to 1,400, right? So $1 or €1 gets you 1,400 lira now because of the hyperinflation. It's obscene, right? So the money is worthless now. When people were okay, they were getting by. Now it's just decimated. So my point is, it's not just in terms of the resources. You actually have nothing that's being stored or grown because the country's upside down because of the war, but also the currency itself. The banking sector is sanctioned. Lebanon's banks are also under crisis, and you have a lot of businesses in Syria, which Lebanon is like a hub that all Syrian business would go through, especially during the war, right? But they've always been interconnected, of course, because of how close they are to each other, and because of the economic crisis in Lebanon. You have a lot of money from Syrian businesses trapped there as well. So that's adding to it on top of the sanctions. And it's horrible, right? So it's good that Tulsi Gabbard is actually acknowledging that, because most people won't acknowledge that. And that's a Trump policy, right? So they would criticize Trump for almost everything. But when it comes to imperialism, no, they won't actually criticize Trump, right? There's no effort, of course, under Biden to remove those sanctions. Why would he? He said he'd keep them. We know that. We looked at this many times. And, she also talks about Idlib, for example. northern Syria. So, I mean, I'm just going to pull this up on the map for you. Idlib is on the Turkish border in the north, and it's not just a city, it's also a governorate, a province. But, you know, this is basically, it's been called, you know, the largest, no, hold on, yeah, look, so I'm going to put on a satellite view. So look, this is northern Syria, right? And this entire region of Idlib, I mean, it's under jihadist control right now. Tulsi Gabbard, she mentioned HTS. HTS is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And, you know, this is just basically a rebranding of Al-Qaeda. I don't mean that like you know, I'm not saying that as hyperbole. No, it's actually rebranded. They just changed the name, and you know, it has a little less foreign fighters in it, right? But they're still jihadists. So you have HTS who control it mostly, and I think you have, I don't know what the figures are right now, but it's estimated around 20,000. You have around 20,000 jihadist fighters that are holed up in Idlib, and of course Turkey's supporting them and shielding them, and you know, it's like not even talked about, right? It's not even talked about. And they're a tool. They're being used by, I mean, it would be bad enough if it was just Turkey, which is extremely concerning since they're a NATO ally. I wonder, you know, how come no one in NATO is complaining that Turkey is helping shield Idlib and protecting all these jihadist groups? It's astonishing, right? But on top of it, you have the CIA-backed ones. You know, you have the British who are involved in the mix as well. Everyone's doing their part, and this is basically the last jihadist stronghold in Syria, and no one talks about that either. That this is basically being used as a thorn in the side of Syria, and on top of that, you know, over here in the northeast. So, you know, you have the two provinces, Al-Hasakeh over here, and then Deir ez-Zor. You got all the oil fields over here, right? So you have the Omar oil fields, which are down in Deir ez-Zor. And then over here, right at the end, right at the end of Hasakeh province, you have another load of oil fields, right? The biggest ones, at least. So, you know, these are where you have all the U.S. bases. I mean, the U.S., they have a base down here in Tanaf. Hold on, let me zoom out a second. Right. So they got one over here at El Tanaf. And like this swath over here, basically this little enclave, this is controlled by not just the U.S., but like whatever's left of the allegedly Free Syrian Army. They have an Air Force base over there, an air base. And then, you know, wherever there's oil, wherever the Kurds are, that's where you'll find the American bases. And, you know, the Biden administration comes along and says, oh no, the oil is not our priority. We're not there to protect the oil, but we're going to keep our troops coincidentally exactly where the oil is, you know. Wow. Oh, okay. So they're just, you know, sightseeing. Is that it? And, you know, coincidentally, it's not just about the oil. This is the breadbasket region. So, you know, we were just talking about wheat, for example, lentils, cotton. Where do you think all this is grown? Right there. Okay, so this is not just the where you'll find all of Syria's oil. It's also where you'll find all of the agricultural sector. And yeah, it's under occupation by the Americans. So that's just great, right? That's just wonderful. So this entire region here is, you know, occupied by the Americans and the Kurdish-led SDF, and then you have Idlib over here, which is occupied by a bunch of jihadists, and Turkey also scattered all across the northern border here. So that's wonderful. And you have Israel down here, which keeps going in through Qanitra, which is just over the Golan Heights, and you know, bombing Syria every week. They bombed Syria again last night. We'll get into that in a second. So, you know, Syria being attacked from all fronts, basically, right? And they want you to believe that that's a civil war. Yeah, okay, sure thing. Yeah. So I again, just going back to Tulsi Gabbard, you know, I respect the fact that she recognizes these things at the very least, that she actually speaks out against them, because, you know, it's you won't hear that from anyone else. You won't hear that from anyone else in Congress, right? I mean, just look at how despicable they are. AOC, for example, she doesn't even recognize, she doesn't even acknowledge, she doesn't even condemn I mean, she doesn't even acknowledge, never mind condemn the fact that Joe Biden bombed my country or bombed any country. I mean, I would equally be outraged if it were another country, right? If it were Iran or if it were any other country. They just say nothing. If they won't say anything about that, how do you expect them to fight for you, man? Like, it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. So with that said, guys, just give me. So again, I mean, like, I think that this is one of the reasons. I don't think it's the main one, but it's one of the reasons that, Tulsi Gabbard got shat on by the Democrats, right? So Hillary Clinton was calling her a Russian agent and all this nonsense, and she was being groomed by the Russians. I mean, just like think how preposterous that is. If I recall correctly, Tulsi Gabbard, she has 16 years in the National Guard. She's a major. Jesus Christ. I mean, she's like just a few ranks away from becoming a general. And she was on the House Armed Services Committee. Like, she's probably been vetted by every single agency more times than you could count. And you're saying she's being groomed by the Russians. What are you even talking about? Like, it's just so preposterous. But anyway, I mean, I don't think this is about personalities right here. Tulsi Gabbard spitting facts. Rand Paul, for example, again, I don't think you can really compare Rand Paul and Tulsi Gabbard. That's not my point. But a few weeks ago, Rand Paul, he grilled Blinken in the Senate confirmation hearing when he was being confirmed for Secretary of State. He grilled him over, supporting all these regime change wars, right, in Libya. And he wanted to interfere more in Syria under Obama. I mean, I don't like anything that Rand Paul says. Like, I've done videos about him. He wrote like a book, something called The Case Against Socialism. He went on The View promoting it. It's horrendous. Like, it's just, I don't agree with anything that guy says. But when he grilled Blinken, I mean, he was spitting straight facts. And I'm not gonna like say that he's lying just because most of the other time I don't like what he's saying or something like that. And again, that's not even the case with Tulsi Gabbard. I think Tulsi Gabbard is perhaps more honest than a lot of her colleagues, right? I mean, she showed she's not afraid to step out of line and call out Hillary Clinton, calling her the queen of warmongers. Come on, man. You're not going to see that from anyone else. Now, again, I'm just grateful that at least one person recognized what Syrians are going through and calls it out. At least that at the very basic minimum, and not just that bombing, but also the sanctions, the regime change war, the fact that you have so many countries ganged up against us. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't look at this. We have so much goddamn evidence that this is a regime change plot. Okay, only a fool could deny that.